Hello everyone, and welcome back to a bit of a Siege news catch-up video, where I will be giving some rapid-fire opinions on the various buffs, nerfs, and rumoured upcoming changes that will hit Siege later down the line. Before anyone asks, I will also be doing a second video that will be focused entirely on the new operators and my thoughts regarding them, as well as the key changes being implemented within Operation Parabellum whenever that ends up releasing. It's rumoured that it'll be on the 6th of next month, but we don't know for certain, I don't think yet, so there we have it. But without further ado, let's start this off with my thoughts on the LMG buff that by this point has been in effect for a good few weeks. This buff saw the damage values of all the LMGs in-game receive a boost, as previously their damage was almost always far below that of their assault rifle counterparts. Do I agree with this buff? Hell yes, as before they saw next to no play thanks to partly this lack of damage per shot. Is it enough to make LMGs on par with most assault rifles though? No, not really. The fact is that LMGs in Siege typically have a number of downsides outside of their previously lackluster damage. These include taking noticeably longer to aim down sights in terms of the time it takes to lift it up and be in the sight's view, and also sometimes having quite aggressive recoil patterns. Therefore, a simple damage buff was never going to be fully enough to make them on par with most assault rifles. However, it is worth noting that in cases where operators have a particularly unimpressive assault rifle option, we do see players choosing to take a viable alternative when there. This can be seen with Finka, the Operation Chimera operator, who has a fairly subpar assault rifle, which is called the Spear 308, and so quite a few players are opting instead to take the 6P41 LMG over the Spear. If Ubisoft wanted to further push LMGs into the spotlight, I believe that a valid option in a future buff would be to increase their destructibility in terms of just destroying parts of the environment and going through walls. This would be cool as the defenders already have access to destruction with shotguns, but shotguns on offense are fairly hard to use given that the attackers are the ones that have to push the opponents and can't just sit tight around a corner waiting for someone to get close enough like the defenders can. The only shotgun that we actually see on attack is Jackal's pocket secondary shotgun, which is more or less an auto pick given that he loses nothing to take it, and that he can destroy hatches and go through floors and walls with it if he needs to. Therefore, increasing LMG environmental destruction would make equipping an LMG sometimes a valid choice for extra utility on offense, at the cost of, as mentioned, being a harder weapon to handle and use quickly in a fight. However, it's very likely that Ubisoft are content with the buff they've already implemented, as LMGs are definitely in a better spot than they were previously, so personally I wouldn't really expect any major changes being implemented anytime soon to LMGs, past the one we've already received. So, continuing the conversation regarding weapons, let's now turn to my thoughts on the secondary SMG recoil nerfs. If you did not know, Ubisoft sees the SMG 11, SMG 12, and Bearing 9 as being too strong, and so are looking to hit their recoil patterns in order to fix this. These were available previously to test out in a previous TTS patch, but it seems that Ubisoft wasn't completely happy with the new recoil system, as we haven't heard or seen anything new regarding this new system since then. Regardless, here are my thoughts. There is no doubt in my mind that secondary SMGs in their current state are very strong. The obvious example is Smoke, a defensive operator who, 99% of the time, takes a shotgun primary and SMG-11 secondary. When you consider that the SMG-11 is seen as a better gun than the FMG-9, which is Smoke's alternate primary option, and that the SMG-11 is a secondary weapon, and that typically primaries should be stronger than secondaries, clearly something is a bit out of whack here balance-wise. To go further into this, you just have to look at two of the most popular and powerful operators currently in the game, the super effective roamer, Vigil, and the often picked hard breacher, Hibana. Now, certainly part of both of their power comes from their great gadgets. Vigil's makes him harder to scout with drones, further enabling his already good roaming game plan, and Hibana's lets her take out many hatches or punch multiple holes in other reinforcements. But part of their power also comes from their great weapons. Hibana's Type 89 is a top-tier assault rifle, and Vigil has two very valid primaries in the K1A and Boss G. But, on top of their great gadgets and fantastic primary weapons, and complementary secondary gadgets, I guess we can't forget, they also have access to what is essentially a second primary gun. Vigil has the SMG 12 and Hibana the Bearing 9. This is a cherry on top of an already very delicious cake, and it's really not all that necessary. All of the already mentioned above is why Hibana and Vigil are two of the most picked operators at the moment, although admittedly Hibana is a hard breacher, and so she would probably see quite a bit of play regardless of whatever else was happening in terms of her weapons and secondary gadgets. But the point definitely still stands. Super powerful secondary SMGs are pushing out current primary weapon options and other secondaries as well, just making already good operators even better. Therefore, in my humble opinion, the nerf is definitely justified, and it will be interesting to see what the final form of it will be when Ubisoft finally makes a decision. The last news piece that will be covered in this news catch-up video will be operator tweaks and nerfs. As mentioned earlier, anything that is being implemented in Operation Parabellum, such as the Echo buff, which is pretty cool, I have to say, will be covered in a separate Parabellum-focused video that should come soon after this one. Instead, the changes that I will be focusing on will be the Lion and Vigil nerfs. To summarize for Lion, his scan was dropped from 3 to 2 charges, has a longer cooldown, and no longer continually tracks players that move and then stop moving. This came about because, quite frankly, it felt pretty bad to play on defense whilst being scanned, particularly when playing as a roamer, as you basically always had to stop moving, and also particularly when combined with Dokubi's phone call and Jackal's track ability. This resulted in a temporary meta where tryhard teams would use most of the global abilities in the game in order to force suboptimal plays and movement out of the defenders. This was unfun, and more or less everyone complained about it. And now here we are! It's been nerfed, and it's a lot weaker than it was. And personally, I feel like it's in a good spot now. Whilst definitely still powerful, as most global abilities always will be, having only 2 charges and a longer cooldown means that it feels a lot closer to Dokubi's phone call in terms of its power level. Once triggered, you simply sit tight in a corner, let it finish, and know that then there is only 1 charge of it left for you to worry about for the rest of that round, rather than the previous 2. The other change was to Vigil, whose drone cloaking gadget received a decreased uptime in addition to a decreased cooldown, meaning basically that it can be used more often but for less amounts of time. Whilst I don't personally have Vigil unlocked yet, in terms of playing against Vigil since the nerf, I've felt like I'm more able to actually find him when droning if I keep my drone alive long enough during the objective push phase. He's still effective at surprising attackers and buying time for the defenders, but marginally less so, and given how good he was, and pretty much still is in terms of his weapon set and secondary gadget options, in addition to obviously being a 3-speed operator, which is hugely beneficial if you want to roam, a slight hit to his gadget, I think, was pretty darn warranted. And that's pretty much it for this initial catch-up video on Siege news. I thank you all for sticking around as long as you have. I hope you find my opinions on the subjects covered in this video interesting enough, and a video with my thoughts on the upcoming Operation Parabellum will be coming up very shortly indeed. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.